especially if you're a lead, this 90 pages is important. There is a realization that is happening in some way.
I'm sure our listeners have a very good idea of what character arc is, but I know as I was coming up, different people told me different versions of what they take on character arc. So what is your version?
The journey from where the character starts in a wounded or hurt state, like an emotional wound, like a core emotional wound that, for what I always tell my students that, for whatever reason, especially when you're an actor, right? These 90 pages or whatever it is important in a character's life. There is a realization that is happening in some way for even, the smallest characters. You want to try and figure that stuff out. But especially if you're a lead, this 90 pages is important. And one of the things that you have to develop in these 90 pages is what happened in the 10,000 pages of life before this 90, right? And somewhere in that 10,000 pages, probably somewhere in the first 1,000, there is emotional wounds, be it abuse or whatever, that has stunted the growth of the character. And then that realization in good screenplays, and especially from an acting standpoint, that realization happens in the course of this script. So it's a self-realization, a self-awareness, a coming of age, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, when I say coming of age, doesn't necessarily, I think you have a script I would love to see get made, the one about, the couple that had been married forever and the wife dies, and
coming of age film of a 70-year-old man.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great example of something that, would really grab somebody.
Okay. Thank you for breaking that down, especially from an actor's perspective, because I don't think a lot of screenwriters even think about the previous 10,000 pages, or even think about, like you said, when a character leaves for 20 pages, like where have they been? What have they been doing and what's going on? Right. And as actors, you have to fill in that gap. And as screenwriters, I think we have to think about that too. And I think you can see it when the screenwriter has thought about it. It shows through the script. Okay.
100%. And that's why I think, films like John Wick and Jack Reacher or whatever, those films are, even if you approach a character like that, right? A lot of times they're just made as these crazy machines, right? They can fight and punch and take a hit and, I work alone and like all of, but there are, I'm sure, people in our special forces and in government agencies that are those people, right? They've come from somewhere, they grew up somewhere, and probably some wound or some experience in their past pushed them towards the military, pushed them towards learning, combat or, whatever, in order to never be taken advantage of again, right? Or whatever it is. So kind of mining, a lot of times those characters can just come off as very one-dimensional. The actors can kind of negate or not think about, hey, did this guy come from a family that had brothers? Were they dirt poor? Were they rich? What sort of advantages did they have? Did they, was he an only child? Was he an orphan? Was he this? What? And sometimes you just got to make that stuff up, as an actor, on best guesses based on, stuff that's said in the script.